She can come in when she apologizes. On Thanksgiving, a locked door turned family into bystanders and a house into a weapon. While a roasted ham steamed behind glass, a teenager shivered outside, and a grandfather learned that warmth had been twisted into leverage. He didn't answer with a fist. He answered with facts, photos, doorbell footage, ER charts, and a paper trail that exposed a deeper fraud. What followed wasn't noise but consequence. Police reports, a bench that called discipline by its real name, and a porch light that went back to meaning welcome, not control. If you've ever wondered how justice actually sounds, measured clicks instead of applause, this is that story. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Coos Bay wakes slow even on holidays. Gulls fuss over the marina, the tide shoulders in, and the wind off the Pacific lays a wet chill across the siding. I stood at the kitchen window with coffee and watched my breath cloud the glass. The thermostat read 72, Martha's rule, but the rooms felt too big. 6 months without her, and I still reach for a second mug before I remember I'm the only one awake. I set out what I'd bring uphill. A pumpkin pie cooling on the counter, a carton of cream in a small brown paper box tied with butcher's twine. Inside lay blue knit gloves for my granddaughter Elsie, who never remembers hers. A thank you card waited beside the pie. I wrote a line to my daughter, grateful for the gutter cruise she sent last month, and slid the card under the twine so I wouldn't forget it. Old habits keep a man together. I still use a paper ledger for money the way I kept job tickets when I worked lines in winter storms. Candace calls it quaint and laughs. The laugh doesn't sting, but it lingers. I opened the ledger to file the grocery receipt, and a letter I'd been using as a marker looked back at me. Bank stationery about verification of collateral tied to my timber lot east of town. I planned to bring it up at dinner, make a plan that didn't involve the bank teaching me new definitions. Forecast said rain turning to snow by afternoon. I strapped the pie into the passenger seat, set the gift box on top, and coaxed the old Ford F-150 to life. Country radio found a station, a voice singing about front porches and promises you keep when it's hard. I texted Candace, "Bringing pie, got something for the kid. 3 o'clock okay?" Then called twice, both went to voicemail. "Call me when you can," I said to nobody and tucked the phone away. 2 years ago, Candace married Randall and moved up to a cedar-shingled house with a view that could sell postcards. He runs an HVAC outfit and talks about margins the way fishermen talk about tides. I told myself it was good she found a fixer. What I didn't tell myself was how often I'd seen Elsie study the floor when he spoke, or how my jokes went thin in that room. Elsie is 16 now, quick as a stray cat, and lately she's thinner than she ought to be in coast weather. Thanksgiving used to be the loudest day we had. When Candace was 10, she learned to mash potatoes without painting the ceiling. When she was 16, she burned the rolls and Martha called it caramelizing and kissed her anyway. "Family is who opens the door when it's blowing sideways," Martha said once, and I carry that like a spare fuse in my pocket. I took the long way around the bay. Houses pressed warmth against windows. Weather radio muttered about the front arriving faster than expected. I stopped at the corner store for a bag of ice and a fresh pack of pens. "Happy Thanksgiving," the kid at the register said, without much hope. "You too, son," I said, and meant it. The road up to Candace's place climbs a bluff where the wind gets a running start. From the street you can see the bay push and pull with the tide. Her house is handsome. Cedar shakes, big panes of glass, the kind of porch Martha would have filled with plants and blankets. Randall set a metal heron by the walk. I parked at the curb and let the engine tick down. The pie's warmth soaked my palm. I thought about the letter again, the language of banks that turns what's yours into something conditional. I thought about Candace's careful voice when Randall is in the room and about Elsie's eyes the last time I dropped off peaches. how they followed me to the door as if weighing whether to speak and choosing silence instead. I wanted to arrive with only dessert and good intentions. Wind shouldered the truck like an old friend trying to hurry me along. I gathered the pie, the gloves, the card, and stepped into the kind of cold that teaches you to move with purpose. The walk was swept. The porch light already burned, though the day hadn't given up yet. Through the dining room window, a long table shone, place settings catching the early light. I climbed the steps and set my thumb over the doorbell. All right, I told myself, go. I told myself this was simple. A grandfather with dessert, a daughter with a key, a holiday that still knew our names. Happy Thanksgiving, I whispered to the door that hadn't opened yet. The first mixed flakes came slantwise, chill confetti on the back of my neck, and the wind off the hill said in its blunt way what it always says to men about to climb: brace. The first flakes stitched themselves to the cedar shingles as I reached the top step. Pie balanced on my palm, the little box of blue gloves tucked under my arm. The porch light hummed like an electric promise, the kind that looks warm from the street and turns thin when you stand under it. I could smell brown sugar and cloves from inside, the sweet salty pull of ham glaze riding a draft that found every seam in my coat. Somewhere in the house, cutlery chimed, chairs scraped, and a laugh lifted over music as if the wind itself had good table manners. She was there on the second step, half hidden by the rail, knees to her chest, hair beaded with sleet. For a beat, I mistook her for a forgotten coat, then the coat breathed. Elsie's lips were rimmed blue, her sneakers were dark with wet, and her hands were trapped in her armpits like small animals caught in winter. The pie tilted in my grip, the box slid. I set them both on the mat and went down on one knee that didn't care for that plan. Hey, kid, I said softly. Hands first. She drew them out like it cost money. I closed my palms around her fingers and rubbed. Her knuckles felt like unlit marbles. I'm okay, she whispered, the automatic answer of every child taught to be small in someone else's weather. Can you feel this? Not really. My coat went around her before the question finished leaving her mouth. The collar swallowed her chin. The porch light painted her cheeks with a false candor. I checked ears, checked the slope of her jaw where a yellowing crescent hid under baby hair. Behind me, the ham smell rose, glazed and perfect, and a fork ticked porcelain. It might as well have been a metronome keeping time on indifference. Don't knock hard. I won't. The words came out even, colder than the wind. She watched the door like eyes watch a tide that takes and takes. I'm not allowed in, she said after a hitch, as if reciting an ordinance. By who? Her eyes slid, not to a person, but to the concept of a person. I messed up the glaze. The ridiculousness of it sat there steaming next to the ham scent, and the two smells braided into something I knew I would recognize in every kitchen for the rest of my life. I pressed the bell. The chime sounded inside. 2 cheerful notes that had nothing to do with us. A beat later, the music nudged louder. Not obscene, just intentional. I tried the knob. It turned a 1/4 inch and clinked off a chain. Wind walked the porch, fast and salt-tanged. Elsie shivered, the kind that starts deep and ripples out, and I pulled her fingers back into my hands, working warmth the way I once worked frozen bolts on a line truck. Steady pressure, no panic. The porch camera above the door wore its tiny, indifferent eye. It saw everything and owned none of it. A sensor tripped somewhere and the foyer brightened, a stage set no one intended me to see. Napkins folded like sails, candles on dimmers, a roast the color of praise. I called Candace. Through the glass, I heard the phone vibrate on a sideboard and wander into silence. I called again, same choreography. Candace, it's Dad. On your porch with Elsie. Doors locked. Call me. The message felt like placing a penny on a rail, small but proof of a moment. Her breathing shortened. I asked about pins and needles, about dizziness. She shook her head, which meant yes. I kept my voice level and spoke to her hands instead of her fear. The porch clock in my head started stamping facts: time, temperature, wind, observable conditions. Habits learned from storms you survive by writing them down. A neighbor's flag cracked once in a gust, a sound like a dry slap. Inside, chairs scuffed and a younger child squealed, the clean slice of a family that believed its story. I looked at the chain, the narrow gap, the shine of a table polished for guests, and I thought of Martha's line about doors in Sideways Rain. There are thresholds you don't guard with metal. There are thresholds you keep with love, and the kind of heat that never burns. Easy, up you get. I stood slowly and brought her with me, her weight feathered by cold. The coat swallowed her shoulders, her heels skidded on the painted tread. I braced her with my hip, reached for the pie with my free hand, and left it where it sat. Glaze could go to hell. Blanket in the truck, then we talk. She nodded, flinching at the action more than the plan. We took the steps one by one. My knee argued. The sleet ticked louder on the railing and wrote its Morse on the back of my neck. At the driveway, the wind found the trap in my scarf and poured through. I kept her moving, small practicalities between us like stepping stones. The heavy door, the floor mat, the heater dial, the wool throw folded behind the seat. The truck coughed warm air and she nodded, flinching at the action more than the plan. We took the steps one by one. My knee argued. The sleet ticked louder on the railing and wrote its Morse on the back of my neck. At the driveway, the wind found the trap in my scarf and poured through. I kept her moving, small practicalities between us like stepping stones. The heavy door, the floor mat, the heater dial, the wool throw folded behind the seat. The truck coughed warm air and filled with the damp smell of thaw and old leather. In the rear view, I could see the house haloed against the darkening sky, lamplight honeying the windows, a Thanksgiving painting suitable for postcards. From here, you couldn't see the chain, you couldn't smell the glaze, you couldn't hear the message I left coasting to a stop in an unread box. A good facade will do that, erase the bruise and keep the shine. I tucked the gloves from the gift box over her hands and pressed them between the vents. Her lashes glittered with thaw. The blue at her mouth retreated a shade. My anger did the opposite. It came up slow from somewhere I had kept tidy. A deep engine you don't run unless the storm warrants it. I set the parking brake and breathed until the breath counted for water instead of fire. The plan took shape the way all good plans do, in increments and with respect for physics. Warm her first, then medication if she had any, then evidence, time stamps, photos if needed, names if they'd give them, the kind of rope a court can grip. Last, the door. Not with a boot, not yet. With the kind of knock that makes men look up and see themselves. I looked once more at the windowed room on the hill, all gloss and ceremony, then at the girl under my coat breathing like the tide finally matched her lungs. We're fine, I told the dash, the wind, the chain, and the version of myself that wanted to break something to make a point. The point would be made. It would be made clean. I left the truck running with the heat turned high, the wool throw cocooning Elsie until only her eyes showed. The vents fogged the windshield and made a porthole of the cold night. Sleet stitched a quick pattern on the glass, erased it, stitched again. I told her I'd be 30 strides away and counted those strides back to the porch, a small arithmetic to keep my temper from doing the math for me. The doorbell chimed its cheerful lie. The chain held. I could see movement in the dining room and the slow ballet of hands and silver. I knocked once, calm, deliberate, and turned down the steps to the side yard where the wind knifed between the cedar fence and the house. The back door had an old fault I'd fixed years ago when the latch stuck. The trick was a lift, a press, and a shove with the hip. It yielded with the same grudging sigh, as if the wood remembered who taught it manners. Heat breathed from the kitchen and met the ocean air in a visible treaty. The room glowed with recessed lights and the polished fatigue of someone staging a life. A platter on the island held slices of ham lacquered to a shine that tempted religion. Cloves pricked the fat cap like studded stars. Steam rose from a pot where sweet potatoes waited under a gloss of butter. I stood in the doorway long enough to learn the scope of the obscenity. All this warmth used as insulation against a child on a step. The conversation faltered as I stepped through. Randall sat at the head of the table. A carving knife paused above the roast like a conductor suspended mid-downbeat. Candace looked up, napkin folded tight in her hands. 2 place settings had been cleared already, glasses turned inward. Guests then, who knew the sound of chairs scraping and decided the night was polite enough to leave. I need a towel, a blanket, and Elsie's coat, I said. My voice landed flat as a tool on a workbench. If she has an inhaler, I need that too. She'll use the hall bath to warm up. Randall set the knife down with ceremony. He pushed from the chair and squared his jacket, the kind of preparation men adopt when they believe posture equals law. You don't walk into my house, he said, smiling a smile that never reached his eyes. This is private property. We have rules. It's a cold porch, I said. Rules can wait. Candace half rose. A white towel appeared in her hand like a small surrender, then hung there, trapped between reflex and approval. Randall's glance was a leash. Her hips touched the chair again. Don't make a scene, she said, too quietly for the way sound carries in kitchens. My eyes kept their own ledger, the way the candles flickered under dimmers, the print on the wall of a Coast Range elk in mist, the way Randall blocked the hall without touching anything but air. Each detail found a page and a line. In storms, you take notes, or you learn everything the hard way, twice. What you're calling a lesson, I said, the state calls endangerment. He laughed, short as a cough. She ruined the glaze. We don't reward disrespect at this table. The table doesn't need respect. I pointed with my chin to the window where sleet traced diagonal lightning. The person does. Candace's mouth pinched, and in that pinch I saw the old math. What keeps peace in a room versus what keeps a child alive on a step. She needs standards, she murmured, as if reciting from a manual someone else wrote. Standards don't start with frostbite, I said. Randall spread his hands. She can come back inside when she apologizes properly. That's the rule. Consequences. Structure. Structure. The word wore a suit. I thought of the chain at the front door, the camera above the frame, the volume nudge on the music after the bell rang. I thought of Elsie's hands like marbles. I thought of what Martha would have said, in fewer words and with more mercy, and stood very still to keep from adding my own sermon. The towel, I said, and held out a hand. Candace's eyes went to his. The leash tugged again, but something in her wrist turned anyway, and the towel crossed the counter to me, an inch at a time, as if the air were heavier now. There's a spare throw in the hall closet, she said. It barely qualified as a whisper. I moved past Randall's shoulder. He shifted enough to let me open the closet, not enough to concede the corridor. I took the throw, dense and new, the kind you buy for guests. Her coat, I said. That stays, he answered. The inhaler? She doesn't need it. The ibuprofen in this guest bath, Candace said, louder than before. A note of apology threaded the words as if sorry could keep time. I took the bottle from the counter basket, its label facing outward for neatness. On the way back, I let my fingers trail along the edge of the framed elk. The glass was warm. I wondered if warmth ever tired of choosing sides. Here are your items, Randall said, and smiled like a doorman. We're done. We're not, I said, and placed the towel under my arm with the throw. But this minute is. He leaned in just enough to fog my glasses. My house, my rules, I met his breath with my own. My granddaughter. Candace flinched as if the word were a dropped plate. I thought of the guests and their turned glasses, of the phone that hummed itself to sleep, of the stage centerpiece with sprigs of rosemary pretending to be a forest. I thought of a chain you could buy at any hardware store and the cost of breaking it one way versus another. I will be back for her coat, I said, and if the door stays chained, I'll be back with people who have keys you can't see. The words came without heat, clean words. You keep tools oiled for nights like this. The knife resumed its arc through the ham. Music rose exactly one notch, the precise degree required to pretend. I stepped into the kitchen's threshold pause, and then through it. The back door sighed again at my hip, and the wet cold bit the room's edge, then retreated as the latch caught. Outside, sleet needled my cheeks and sharpened the promise I'd just made. At the truck, Elsie's eyes were open. I wrapped the throw around her and slid the towel over her knees. The cab smelled like thawing wool and old leather and the faint perfume of cloves that had ridden my coat out to the street. The ham would be perfect in there, Out here, perfection was the heater's hum and a girl's hands regaining color. I set the ibuprofen on the dash, felt my knee complain about all the agreements I was making with age and weather, and let the anger cool into something useful. A list, a plan, a line I would not step back from even if a chain begged me to. The heater breathed steady, turning the truck's cab into a small, lawful climate. Elsie's breath fogged and cleared the side window in shallow pulses. Color crept back under the blue at her mouth like dawn learning its job. I set the gift gloves over her fingers and cupped them in mine until the wool took heat. The dashboard clock marked time the way line crews do, quietly without asking permission. I logged what I could see, sleet thickening, wind from the bay pushing at 30, maybe more in gusts, porch chain engaged, interior music elevated one notch after the chime. Subject, my granddaughter, thin t-shirt, wet sneakers, shivering present, oriented, speech soft but coherent. These are not poetry words. They're the kind you use when the weather and another man's pride hold the same door shut. I dialed 911. The phone felt too light. 911, what is your emergency? This is Thomas Hale, I said. Coos Bay, Bluff Street, cedar shingle house on the ridge. I found my 16-year-old granddaughter on their porch in sleet conditions. Door chained. She's shivering hard. I'm warming her in my truck. I'm concerned for child endangerment. The dispatcher's voice had ballast. Is she breathing normally? Shallow? Color improving. No visible bleeding. Old bruising on the wrist. Lips were blue, settling some. Keep warming. Is it safe to transport? Yes, I'll take her to Coos Bay EER now. I can be reached at this number. Please note occupants refuse to open door. I rang twice, understood. I'm notifying patrol and CPS intake. Drive safe. The call ended with the soft click of someone else taking part of the wait. I left a short voicemail for Candace because records matter. Time, temperature, my plan, where we were headed. No adjectives. Adjectives look like revenge on paper. Before I put the truck in gear, I made one more pass at essentials. 2 minutes, I told Elsie. She nodded under the blanket, the movement barely disturbing the wool. The porch steps wore a sheen now, the kind that sees a man and thinks, not yet. I knocked once. Coat an inhaler, I said through the chain. The music pressed back like a hand over a mouth. On the turn, my boot slid. The world flicked sideways and caught me at the knee. Pain fired bright and unnecessary up my thigh, and a coin of iron rose on my tongue. I did not stay down. You don't argue with weather on your back. You get vertical and make plans. I photographed the step, the ice glare, the chain gap, the rain gauge, Randall mounted for decor and never read. I held my phone steady until the image took on more than light, until it held a kind of intent I could hand to a stranger in a badge and say, here is where the cold lived, not just in air, but in a choice. Back in the cab, the heater had muscled the damp into a manageable fog. I slid the blue gloves fully onto Elsie's hands and tucked the blanket around her hips. Water, I said, and poured the thermos cap half full. She sipped, throat working, eyes on me in the rearview mirror like a shoreline at low tide. Everything exposed, everything waiting. I tested the brake, the steering, the ache in my knee. The truck would make it, so would I. My phone buzzed before I shifted. Unknown number, local. Tom? It's Ann across the street. I saw your truck. You okay? We're headed to ER. I think you should know, she said, voice tight with the courage of small towns. Our doorbell cam has video of Elsie out there, not just today, a rainy night last month too. And there's a clip where your son-in-law messes with our mic after we spoke up. We can send files. We'll talk to police if needed. Please send them, I said, and thank you. 2 words heavier than they look. I buckled in, eased from the curb, and let the wipers write their dull, true story across the glass. The bay threw spray even from this distance. I kept the truck at a speed that would not make the nurse roll her eyes, and I rehearsed the facts for intake like a man going over a panel schedule. Found at time X, conditions Y, actions taken Z. A life can be saved by the way you order your sentences. The ER greeter handed us the smell everyone knows, antiseptic and warm plastic, and the promise that something lived here besides performance. The triage nurse clipped a pulse ox to Elsie's finger. The red diode blinked a patient metronome. Temperature registered low enough to earn us a heated blanket and a familiar frown. Mild hypothermia signs, she said, mostly to the chart. Shivering pallor. Bruising at different stages. I'll cover intake, I said. I'm her grandfather, Atia. She nodded like the truth was a simple tool. In the fluorescent light, the blue fled the edges of Elsie's mouth. A tech slid warmed blankets from a cabinet that hummed like a reliable truck. Heat here was not a lesson. It was a duty. The nurse asked about asthma, allergies, medications. I gave what I knew and didn't flinch when I didn't know. She wrote anyway. I handed over my case number from the dispatcher, Anne's full name and number, and the photos. The nurse didn't promise outcomes, good nurses never do, but she said a social worker was on call if we wanted to talk. Elsie's eyes closed under the blanket's new weight, and a tremor eased out of her shoulders like a kite line loosening. The knee announced itself again once the adrenaline's lease ran out. It would be ugly tomorrow. Tonight, it was a tax I was happy to pay. I sat at the foot of the bed and let the bright hum of the ER do its work on us both. Somewhere in town, brown sugar burned politely on a ham and people said grace without knowing what it costs. In this room, Grace wore a name badge and carried a chart. I called the dispatcher back to confirm transport and arrival, then texted the neighbor to thank her again and to ask for permission to share the files with CPS. The phone chimed once, of course. I breathed for the first time since the porch. The social worker would come and police would follow, and the weather inside that cedar house would have to change or answer for not changing. My job was simple now. Keep the ledger, tell the truth, stay upright. The rest, for once, belonged to systems meant to hold when individual men fail. Fluorescent light has a way of flattening holidays. The curtain track rattled as a nurse slid us into a bay. The heated blanket cart sighed, and a printer murmured somewhere behind the desk like a steady domestic storm. Elsie's pulse oximeter blinked a small red heartbeat at her fingertip. The color along her lips had moved from bruised to pale, which is what passes for hope in a room like this. My knee had stiffened to a wooden hinge, but wood holds if you set the grain right. The nurse read numbers into the chart the way a lineman calls distances on a pole. Skin cool, shivering present. Temperature low but rising. Older bruises in varying stages. She lifted an eyebrow at me, the professional kind that means I won't editorialize, but I did see. She tucked the warm blanket higher and asked about asthma, allergies, meds. I answered what I knew and said when I didn't. Honesty saves time in places that count time in beeps. They arrived as if the air had paged them. Candace first, hair perfect, lipstick brave, dressed the color of a good cranberry sauce, and Randall at her shoulder, angling his body to make the doorway feel smaller. The smell of their night, ham sugar, cologne, candle smoke, rode in and hit the antiseptic wall. He opened with accusation because men like him know to throw the first pitch. Kidnapping, he said, breaking and entering. The words bounced off tile. Two officers stepped in a breath later and laid the neutral grid over us all. One took a position near Randall without looking like he was taking a position. The other turned to me with a notebook and a face that had seen enough holidays turn into paperwork. Sir, name? Thomas Hale, I said. Grandfather. They separated us by instinct and training. A social worker in sensible shoes introduced herself with a voice designed for fire alarms and kitchens. She asked Candace and Randall to wait in chairs just outside the bay. She asked me to stay by the foot of the bed while a nurse kept company with Elsie. The curtain didn't close all the way. Hospital curtains never do. Gaps are how truth drafts through a room. The officer's questions were a series of clean joints. Where did you find her? Time, weather, door chain, attempts to make contact, transport. I gave each answer like a man handing over tools one at a time. I added the 911 incident number and Anne's full name and phone number across the street, said there were multiple recordings of porch punishment, and one clip where Randall disabled a neighbor's mic after they spoke up. I showed the photos, the chain gap, the ice sheen on the step, the rain gauge Randall doesn't read. The officer's pen made a measured, reassuring sound. On the other side of the gap, Randall argued with air. Parenting choice, he said, cooling off period. He used the word standards the way a salesman uses lifetime, then added what he couldn't help adding: she could come in if she apologized properly. The social worker wrote something down that I very much hoped she would quote later. The nurse asked Elsie where she wanted to be tonight. The room went still except for the beeps. Her voice came from somewhere new, quiet but not apologizing. With my grandpa. The social worker met her eyes to check for coercion and found none. I did not move because sometimes love is measured by the inches you don't step closer. Candace tried to fold herself small in a visitor's chair. She smoothed her dress, twisted a napkin-sized tissue into rope, avoided the monitor because numbers don't say we meant well. We didn't mean harm, she said to nobody in particular. The statement hovered, flimsy as steam, and refused to carry weight. The second officer took IDs. He repeated facts back to Randall in the same tone he might use to read a parking ordinance. Juvenile outside for hours in sleet. Locked chain. No response to doorbell or phone. Medical observation of mild hypothermia and older bruises. Investigation into endangerment. He didn't say discipline was illegal. He said access to warmth is not conditional. There's a difference big enough to drive a cruiser through. The social worker stood at the foot of the bed and outlined the next beats. She would complete an immediate safety plan, flag CPS for urgent follow-up, and coordinate discharge to me for the night if the nurse cleared it. She would provide Candace and Randall with numbers and conditions. She did not raise her voice. In rooms like this, resolve doesn't need volume. I emailed the photos to a department account and forwarded Anne's message chain with her permission. The officer confirmed a receipt and asked me to save originals. We'll need exact times, he said. We'll be in touch. My knee throbbed agreement on each syllable. Randall ran out of nouns and reached for tone. He called me unwell, suggested I was grieving myself into drama. He smiled without teeth when he said private property, as if the blanket over a child were an eminent domain problem. The officer held up a hand the way a good foreman does when someone forgets the job site has rules. The hand worked. Elsie dozed under the warmed weight, the oximeter pulsing its tiny lighthouse. The ER became itself again, printers, carts, a television in a waiting room, muttering a parade scored for no one. The ham smell faded from their clothes, and with it the holiday claim on the night. Candace stared at the floor tiles seams as if a different life might be grouted between them. For the first time, she looked at me. It wasn't a message, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was a woman taking attendance in her own story and finding absences. The officers closed their notebooks. The social worker summarized. Discharge to me, no contact tonight except through her, CPS to follow, statements to be scheduled, medical notes to be preserved. She handed me a paper that turned a hallway into authority. I signed where she pointed. Pins can be small crowbars if you know what you're prying up. Outside the sliding glass, sleet kept at it. A patient carpenter reshaping edges. The clock above the nurse's station clicked toward a time that didn't care about dinner. My phone buzzed with a dispatch acknowledgement and Anne's file sent confirmation. I breathed and felt the breath do its whole job. A man can get attached to the sound of procedure when he spent years listening to wind. Under these lights, meat is just protein and apologies are only words. Vitals don't flatter, and signatures travel farther than voices. The storm, for the moment, had moved indoors and dressed itself in forms with boxes to check. I stood with my weight on the good leg and looked over the line where blanket met wrist and thought about the next threshold. Not a door this time, but a desk where truth is notarized or faked. That was tomorrow's weather. Tonight's forecast was simple. Keep watch, keep notes, keep the promise I'd made on a porch where a chain had believed it could hold. Courthouses smell like paper that learned to stand up for itself. 2 mornings after Thanksgiving, sleet had hardened into a rind along the steps, and my knee greeted every stair with a small oath it didn't say out loud. Inside, fluorescence bleached the holiday colors from everyone's clothes. The county seal hung over a modest bench. The recorder's red light glowed like a truth-telling ember. Elsie sat with the social worker 2 pews behind me, a knit cap tugged to her eyebrows, hands clasped like they were learning they belonged to her. The clerk read our names and the caption. The judge kept it spare. Emergency posture, temporary placement, protective conditions, no grandstanding. Randall arrived in a suit he thought was a full sentence and stood with a local attorney whose tie admitted it had argued with mornings like this before. Candace came in a sweater that might have been warm yesterday and clutched a folder like a flotation device. I had my timeline, the printed photos, the ER discharge, and a brace wrapped neat under my slacks. You bring tools you can lift. The social worker went first. She spoke in the cadence of forms, but the words didn't hide. Mild hypothermia signs documented in ER. Shivering, pallor, low temperature rising under warmed blankets, bruising in varying stages. Juveniles stated preference to stay with the grandfather for the night. No coercion observed. 911 incident number. Photographs noting chained door and weather conditions. Doorbell camera footage offered by a neighbor pending delivery to investigators. Recommendation: temporary placement with the grandfather, no contact from the stepfather, supervised contact with the mother per CPS plan. Randall's attorney stood and tried to dress the porch in logic. Cooling off period, structure, house rules, he said, as if the law were a rug he could tug to cover the cold. He hinted that grief had made me theatrical, that breaking a back door's sticky latch was breaking and entering, that a minor could always walk back inside if she apologized properly. Words can be mirrors. The wrong ones reflect the wrong man. When the judge turned to me, I didn't tell a story. I laid a line. Time I found her. Sleet, wind, temperature dropping, chain visible, bell unanswered, calls heard ringing inside, warming in truck, gloves, blanket. Transport to ER on dispatcher's instruction. Photos of the chain gap, ice sheen on the tread, rain gauge on the rail. Neighbor Ann's offer and number, doorbell clips of prior porch punishments. One video of Randall disabling their mic after they spoke. Knee slip noted, not relevant to anyone's safety except mine. I slid the packet forward. The clerk stamped it with a sound that has always made sense to me. The judge asked for times, for temperatures, for whether apology was actually cited as a condition of re-entry, for whether the door was chained the whole time. He wasn't writing philosophy, he was building a frame that would not sag under excuses. The answers put weight where weight belonged. Then it was Candace. She stood like a fuse that wasn't sure which way fire travels. The judge's questions were small tools. Were you aware the door was chained? How long was your daughter outside? Had similar discipline occurred porch, garage, rain before? Her first words circled the old drain. Standards, lessons, we meant well. Then her eyes found Elsie's. The room held its breath in a way that felt like weather leaving. Yes, she said, voice thin but intact. Chained. Hours, she swallowed. It's happened before. The recorder didn't blink. It kept its red light and took the truth in one line at a time. Something shifted in the pews, not loud, but final. I could have left it there, but storms travel in bands. Your Honor, I said, and raised the bank letter like a flag of the next front. I explained the notice I'd received about verification of collateral tied to my timber lot east of town. I submitted a copy of a quitclaim deed purporting to bear my signature, recorded 3 months ago. Sunday notarization. My name kinked where my hand never kinks. The clerk compared filing dates. The judge narrowed his gaze the way men do when they're choosing a socket. Proffer, he said to the far table. Candace's fingers tightened on her folder. He had me handle paperwork, she said, eyes on the edge of the bench. For the business. He said it was temporary just to help with the line of credit. The words temporary authorization sounded like a ladder that had always been a snake. The attorney objected without volume. The judge waved it into the air where it did not matter.
Candace's fingers tightened on her folder. He had me handle paperwork, she said, eyes on the edge of the bench. For the business. He said it was temporary, just to help with the line of credit. The words temporary authorization sounded like a ladder that had always been a snake. The attorney objected without volume. The judge waved it into the air where it did not matter. The court called the recorder's index. A clerk confirmed a recorded deed transferring interest from me to Candace, and nodded to it. a home equity line of credit drawn against my lot. Notary of record, a relative of Randall with a disciplinary history on file. The judge ordered status quo preservation, no further draws, and directed counsel to pursue forensic signature analysis and report within 10 days. Stamps thudded, paper grew muscle. The fraud thread went from suspicion to docket number without changing its shoes. Orders came like clean instructions on a pole. Temporary physical custody of Elsie to me for 30 days. No contact from Randall except through counsel. Supervised contact for Candace coordinated by CPS and the social worker. Preserve all evidence. Videos, phone logs, texts. Review hearing set. Investigators notified. On the deed, an injunction preventing transfer or encumbrance. Directive to file a civil fraud complaint. Referral of the notary to the appropriate board. Each point clicked into place. You could hear a life re-racking itself to a level bubble. In the hallway, the building exhaled copier heat and cold air from the door each time it opened. Randall leaned too close and hissed about reputations, about men in small towns who overplay their hand. His lawyer put a palm on his sleeve with the weight of a man who has seen contempt citations ruin actual days. Candace approached with a face shorn of whatever script she'd tried to read. I was scared, she said, words fraying. Of money. Of him. Of starting over. Truth is the only rope strong enough, I said. Hold it and we'll pull. We waited at the clerk's window to file the copies. The clock behind the glass counting minutes, nobody would remember by number. I texted Anne the case number and thanked her for standing in the wind with us. I emailed the officers the orders and asked how they preferred the neighbor videos delivered. My phone chimed acknowledgments that sounded, to my tired knee and my better heart, like small lengths of rebar sliding into wet concrete. When we stepped into the brittle noon, the cold felt honest. It didn't pretend to be warm. Elsie slipped her arm through mine and matched my slow pace down the courthouse steps. The brace held. So did I. Behind us, a bench light blinked off, the red eye going dark until the next case asked it to remember. Ahead, the truck waited, heater an attainable promise, and a stack of next steps sat quietly in my pocket. Fraud complaint, notary review, evidence preservation, and a calendar date where truth would have to show up again. I drove us toward the house with the porch light that means what it says. Morning made the house honest again. Light pooled on the laminate, the thermostat clicked at 72 the way Martha always insisted, and the kettle sang without asking anyone's permission. I stirred oatmeal until the oats went soft and the steam fogged my glasses. Wood smoke from last night's fire lingered in the curtains, an aftertaste of heat that belonged to us. Elsie came down the hall in my thick socks and a knit cap tugged to her eyebrows, hair sleep-tangled, shoulders not quite braced the way they had been. She sat, cupped her hands around the mug I slid across, and ate like a person reminded of hunger by safety, not shame. We didn't wreck the quiet with talk. We let spoons tap and radiators tick, and the house do the explaining. After dishes, I opened the binder I'd started the night of the ER, the ledger upgraded for a different kind of storm. Tab 1, Court Orders, stamped and dated. Tab 2, the ER note, the social worker's safety plan. Tab 3, photo printouts of the chain gap and the ice sheen on the step, time-stamped, weather written in the margin. I added Anne's email and the link to her doorbell camera files, then stapled my call log on top, times, who spoke, what was said, tone. It felt like building scaffolding against a leaning wall. You don't push, you brace and re-level. My phone vibrated with the town's version of a siren. The local paper posted a short piece. Police, CPS reviewing Porch incident, no arrests. The comments ran like a tide riled by wind. Some were kind in plain words, some were cruel in fancier ones. I screenshotted the worst for the ongoing record and closed the app before the noise convinced me of anything it hadn't earned. Anne knocked mid-morning, hair damp with fog, a Tupperware of soup in her hands and the thin bravado decent people wear when they step into another family's weather. She didn't linger. She said they'd both given statements and 2 other neighbors would too. I thanked her at the threshold and meant the thanks the way you mean a brace that takes load without splintering. When the door shut, the house felt a notch sturdier, as if the hinges had been oiled by solidarity. Randall posted on his company page the next hour a statement about malicious rumors timed to look reluctant. It accused no one by name while accusing everyone by implication. A voicemail followed, a quiet hiss promising I'd regret slander and that I'd stolen a child to play hero. I saved the file, forwarded it to the officer and the social worker, and added a line to the log. I did not reply. Not all invitations deserve attendance. The knee began its litany by noon, a dull drum under the kneecap that asked for attention, the way weather taps a window. Urgent care smelled like antiseptic and pens. The PA prodded, nodded, ordered an X-ray that confirmed what the body already knew: a hairline contusion, brace and rest recommended, ice and elevation, a pill if I wanted. I didn't want. I signed for a brace and made a joke about wood grain holding if you set the brace right. The tech smiled without taking sides. Back home, I found Elsie on the couch with a book and the dog-eared look of someone relearning stillness. We drove to the school counselor's office after lunch, where a bulletin board wore encouragement like a quilt, and the clock's second hand ran without rushing anyone. The counselor, a woman with calm posture and a legal pad, offered accommodations for fatigue and appointments. She praised Elsie's short story turned in before break, called it precise and brave, and suggested private journaling, a place to park feelings and facts both. Elsie nodded, not to please, but as if she had found a hook on a crowded wall. At 3, the therapist appeared on a screen in our living room, a rectangle framed by books, ground rules, consent, a safety plan that lived in the same binder as court orders. They walked the edges: what helps when breath gets short, what to do when a door feels like a verdict, who to call at 2 a.m. when even hot water can't talk you down. When asked to name 3 places she felt safe, Elsie surprised us both. Grandpa's truck, she said, then the kitchen when it smells like cinnamon, and after a pause, the shed when it's raining. The therapist smiled in a way that made the answer not just acceptable, but wise. Homework assigned, appointment booked. The house exhaled a measurable inch. Candace's texts came like weather in the wrong season. Past midnight, after the spine loosens and the guard drops. "I'm sorry," one said. "I was scared," another. He said it was temporary. A call connected long enough for breath and then clicked off. A fledgling attempt at truth that couldn't hold altitude. I replied the same way each time because mantras exist for a reason. Truth first. Safety first. We'll work the rest. I sent the hotline numbers again and the social worker's contact. I didn't tell her what to do with them. The rope has to be taken in your own hands. Recovery looks like chores. In the late afternoon, we went to the woodshed. I showed Elsie how to read the grain and let the wedge carry the argument instead of her shoulders. Her first strike skittered, the second caught, the third sang the clean song of a split done right. We stacked kindling by size. We tightened a cabinet hinge in the kitchen and pretended the smell of WD-40 was perfume. She made cocoa too sweet, and we accepted our fate with grace. Later, she took seconds of stew and didn't look at my face for permission. I looked at the dog to give her privacy and privately marked the moment in a ledger that lives outside paper. When darkness came, we kept our covenant with warmth. The thermostat clicked. The fire settled from conversation to coals. I wrote the day's notes in my spiral: CPS file number confirmed, neighbor statements logged, urgent care results attached, school accommodations initiated, therapy scheduled, Randall voicemail archived, no direct contact initiated by me. On the next page, I split the plan into 2 tracks the way a crew splits a line around an obstacle. Track 1, protect the child, CPS, therapy, school, boundaries, a routine that tells the nervous system the house keeps its promises. Track 2, protect the assets, fraud complaint, notary review, injunction enforcement, signature analysis, bank freeze. I boxed the words and dated the margin. Order where chaos stood yesterday is a kind of prayer.
Before bed, I checked the doors without thinking about chains and turned the porch light on because porches deserve truth even when no one is at them. Elsie drifted down the hall with a book under her arm and a tiredness earned by doing ordinary things. The binder rested on the coffee table, a blunt instrument that holds. The knee hummed in its brace like an old friend reminding me to sit when sitting is enough. I turned off the lamp and let the house be what a house is supposed to be when the storm has moved on. A place that minds the temperature and waits without judgment for the next morning to make its case. By the end of the first week, the house had a schedule you could set your pulse to. Coffee at 6, logs on the grate at 6:10, oatmeal or eggs, depending on what the knee allowed me to stand for. Elsie and I did the therapist's morning drill, 3 breaths in for 4 counts, out for 6, palms on the table to remind her the surface was solid. The dog we didn't have still seemed to circle the kitchen. That's how safety behaves at first. Imagined, then earned. I marked the calendar with small things that make a spine: school counselor check-in, telehealth on Tuesday, brace rewrap on Thursday, fraud complaint draft by Friday. The binder lived on the coffee table like a square, patient animal. Miss Delgado from CPS called mid-morning. Her voice had the calm of someone who knows what forms can and can't do. We confirmed the no-contact order against Randall was holding. She'd logged the neighbor statements and the ER notes, and she wanted copies of the screenshots showing Randall's malicious rumor post and his voicemail. I sent them while we spoke, watching the little progress bar climb like a careful hiker. She said CPS would request an extension on the temporary placement and that a protection order hearing might consolidate the issues. Keep your routine, she said, and your notes. It was the nicest kind of assignment. By noon, I sat across from my union lawyer, Kincaid, at a diner where the coffee arrived before you finished wanting it. We built the week into a plan: civil fraud complaint on the quitclaim deed, preservation letters to the bank, a request to freeze further draws on the HELOC, a referral to the Secretary of State's notary board. He asked for a clean timeline of phone records and pictures, and I slid him the packet I'd printed that morning. He nodded at the margins where I'd written weather and time in the small block handwriting Martha used to tease. Courts like straight lines, he said, make it impossible to mistake what happened for what was intended. The next squall blew in on paper. A process server knocked at 2 with an envelope from Randall's attorney. An emergency protective order petition against me alleging I was unstable, grieving to the point of menace, and had brandished threats. I read it twice, then a third time, the way you look at a map that insists the road you drove yesterday doesn't exist. Kincaid scanned it, grunted the professional version of a laugh, and told me not to breathe any different on account of it. It's posturing, he said. Still, answer cleanly. We added a tab to the binder, defensive filings. Evidence has a way of arriving when you keep the porch light on. That evening, Elsie came into the kitchen with my old MP3 recorder from the junk drawer, thumbed it like a worry stone, and said she wanted me to hear something. The file began with Thanksgiving music, ordinary as tinsel, then Randall's voice told Candace to turn the deadbolt and let him think. Later, over the whir of the oven fan, he said, "Turn it up." No shouting, no movie villain thunder, just the polite mechanics of a lock. It was uglier for the restraint. I labeled the file, saved it to 2 drives, and emailed a copy to Kincaid and Ms. Delgado with a subject line that liked itself. Audio, front door timestamp, 3:17 p.m. And texted within the hour, a PDF of the ham order with delivery timestamps that didn't match Randall's "we were already eating" story. The invoice showed the roast hadn't hit the driveway until nearly noon. If they were carving at 11, they were carving air, I wrote back. She replied with a thumbs up that I read as a hand steadying a ladder. The night carried one more guest. A young man knocked, hat in hand, shoulders squared like he'd borrowed courage from the wind. He gave his name as Jake Coleman, 22, Randall's son. He stood on the porch like he'd rehearsed not crossing thresholds. I saw the post, he said, and looked past me as if the house might take offense. He did that kind of thing when I was a kid. He described silent dinners, doors locked behind him as lessons, winter mornings with the garage as classroom. He said he moved out twice and came back once because money has its own gravity. If it helps, he said, I'll tell it under oath. I wrote his number into the ledger and asked if he wanted a copy of the hotline list. He nodded, folded it into his wallet carefully, and left the porch light unoffended. I met Candace the next morning at the cafe by the marina we used to visit after school plays. She looked like a person who had slept in strangers' sentences. We didn't hug. She stared at the harbor and talked in quiet, plain weather. He told her the deed was temporary. He'd said I'd never notice. He'd said she was weak if she didn't set standards. She took the papers he gave her because shame and fear make a team that wins too often. I slid the hotline numbers across the table again in the social worker's card and told her two truths in the order they make sense. Safety first. Then whatever is left. She nodded without looking up, which is sometimes how agreement starts. Kincaid filed responses to Randall's petition, attaching the audio file, the invoice, the ER notes, the neighbor statements. He moved for sanctions if they persisted with bad faith claims. Ms. Delgado emailed to confirm CPS had received Jake's contact and would reach out for a statement. The bank froze the line on my lot pending review. The notary board acknowledged the referral. The binder swelled enough that I switched to metal rings. In the house, healing looked like small arithmetic. Elsie stacked kindling by size without instruction. She hung a sign by the front door in her careful hand. In this house, warmth is not a reward. And then pretended it wasn't a declaration. She sat at the table and drafted what the therapist called a victim impact statement, which I read only when she slid it over. It wasn't a wound on paper. It was a map out of a neighborhood she didn't choose. She wrote about the taste of air when you're not allowed in and the sound of a doorbell that practiced being ignored. She wrote one sentence that folded me in half. I want to remember what it's like when doors are just wood again. All Kia. At the end of the day, I put the binder back on the table and the log by the hearth, two kinds of fuel. The knee ached and said it would like tomorrow to be gentler. I told it tomorrow would not be asked for permission. I circled a date on the calendar where truth would have to show up in daylight and sit with a judge again. Before bed, I turned the porch light on without looking for anyone. A house is a story it tells with temperature and switches and the way it holds the dark outside. Ours was learning its lines. The next act would not be the storm. It would be the inventory after, the counting that keeps you from telling yourself the wind didn't blow. We had our ledger. We had our breath. And when morning came, we'd have steps to take no matter what the paper said about us. Winter sunlight made the courthouse benches look cleaner than they were. The recorder's red eye burned steady above the clerk, and the judge's calendar had that end-of-year fatigue I recognized from long shifts in storm season. We were one case among many, a stack of paper with cold attached. I had my binder divided by tabs. ER notes, photos, neighbor affidavits, the ham invoice, the audio of the deadbolt command, and my knee in a brace that minded its manners better than some men do. The judge called the matter for review, status on safety orders, placement, and preliminary findings regarding alleged financial fraud. He noted receipt of exhibits without ceremony. Procedure has a way of eating drama for breakfast. The social worker spoke first. The cadence of her report is unhurried as a river. Elsie stable at my residence. Therapy attendance steady. School accommodations in place. No contact order observed by Randall. Candace cooperating with supervised visits. Recommendation: extend placement with the grandfather, maintain restrictions, continue services. The judge nodded once, a small hinge moving a heavy door. Brief letters came in next like tools handed up a ladder. ER physician noting resolution of hypothermia signs and non-acute older bruises documented. School counselor saying attendance improved, journaling helpful, writing precise. No one objected because facts don't mind the light. Randall's attorney stood and narrowed his narrative. He conceded the porch incident occurred, called it a judgment error, withdrew his prior petition against me to avoid sanctions, and asked the court to consider relaxing no-contact terms. If you've ever watched a man put gloss on wet wood, you know the look. The judge's face ran a thumbnail across the grain and didn't smile. Candace's turn felt like a tightrope hung over two winners. She admitted complicity born of fear and money, outlined steps she'd taken, weekly therapy, financial counseling, a separate phone, a small savings, and apartment listings printed and folded into her purse. She requested supervised parenting time and agreed to parenting classes without being asked twice. I watched Elsie's shoulders ease half an inch, the kind of measurement that matters in rooms where inches are the unit of progress. Fraud took its place on the docket without raising its voice. A bank letter confirmed the HELOC was frozen and irregularities flagged. The notary board acknowledged prior discipline and an active investigation. An investigator from the DA's office appeared for 3 sentences. Fraud and forgery review open. Charging decision reserved. Evidence preservation underway. The judge added his own weight. Injunction against any transfer or encumbrance of my timber lot. Orders to preserve all records. A status conference set for the property track. Each stamp sounded like a nail finding a stud. Orders from the bench came in a sequence that made sense the way a good checklist does. Long-term protective order. Randall barred from contact with Elsie except through counsel or CPS. Distance and communication restrictions specific enough to measure. Temporary physical custody of Elsie to me for 12 months or until further order. Candace to receive supervised visitation per the CPS plan with a reunification pathway if she complied with therapy, classes, and a safe housing plan. Injunction confirmed. My counsel authorized to pursue civil remedies on the deed and notary issues. The judge added a line that mattered more than its length. Conditional access to warmth is unacceptable. It constitutes a risk of endangerment. He didn't raise his voice. He just put the truth where it would be quoted. Outside, the air was crisp and ordinary, which felt like wealth. Anne and 2 neighbors signed sworn statements at the clerk's counter without leaning on adjectives. Across town, Randall's storefront posted a hand-lettered, temporarily closed sign with hours scratched out. A local headline read like a deep breath, court extends protection in Porch case, fraud probe opened. The comments under it cooled. Rumor never likes company when facts show up. Back home, the house kept its promise. The thermostat clicked. The fire settled. Elsie took the new tab I'd labeled Final Interim Orders and slid it into the binder like she was filing a song. The social worker called to confirm the schedule for supervised visits. Candace, through that line, said thank you for truth before comfort, a phrase that stuck to the woodwork and made the place feel larger. We picked a neutral site with soft chairs and a door that didn't lock from the outside. I logged the day in my spiral. Orders entered, fraud track referred, petition withdrawn, supervised time set, next dates calendared. I wrote the judge's warmth line verbatim because I wanted it in my handwriting. Elsie printed out her sentence. Warmth is not a reward, taped it above the desk, and then pretended it was decoration. We ate stew that tasted better than it should have, and she asked if the truck needed new wiper blades. I told her we'd check them in the morning. The plan for tomorrow felt like a luxury. Wipers, school, woodpile, therapy, dinner. Later, I stepped onto the porch and switched the light on. The cold breathed against my face without agenda. A car hissed by on wet pavement. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime tried a few notes, then thought better of it. Behind me, the house had a sound I know by heart. Radiator tick, page turned, the small sigh of someone reading under a blanket because the heat belongs to them without condition. I leaned against the post and let my knee tell me it remembered stairs, then forgave it. The storm hadn't made us heroes. It had made us accurate. The court decided what it could. The house kept the rest. I went back inside and closed the door with the simple authority of wood sliding into a latch, a promise measured in inches and honored in degrees. Nights are quieter when a house remembers its job. By late winter, the binder on my coffee table had thinned in the right places. Tabs worn from use, not panic. The injunction sat near the front like a good lock. Therapy schedules and school notes rode the middle like ballast. I did my circuit without thinking about it. Wood box, thermostat, deadbolts that don't keep families apart, smoke alarm blink. 72 degrees is not a number in this place. It's a promise kept. Elsie finished algebra at the dining table, pencil tapping a small patient rhythm. She stood, stretched, and taped a fresh strip of printer paper next to the old one above the desk. The first line had become part of the wall. Warmth is not a reward. The new one was smaller, handwritten, and steady. Keep the light honest. She didn't announce it. Houses don't ask for speeches. We spent Saturday in the shed where the salt air turned screws stubborn and hinges into teachers. The wiper blade on the truck had started to chatter, so we swapped it out, her hands doing more of the work than mine. I showed her how to oil a squeak without baptizing the whole hinge. She rehung the back bedroom door that had stuck since Martha's last spring cleaning. We lifted, nudged, and listened for the clean bite of latch on strike plate, a sound like a sentence finding its verb. Good, I asked. She pressed the knob and smiled in a way that made the cold outside feel employed. Good, she said. Repair is a creed you learn by muscle and measure. Mail came in a stack that used to frighten me. Now I triage. Miss Delgado's postcard confirmed the next review date and noted orders holding. Kincaid's envelope held the forensic report. Signature analysis favored me. The Sunday notarization looked like a magic trick performed by a cousin who'd already lost his audience. A long letter arrived via the social worker from Candace. She wrote with the grammar of someone who practiced alone. She said the words that count, I did it, and I am doing differently. She listed receipts, therapy attended, budgeting class completed, savings started, a lease application submitted under her own name. She didn't ask for a door to swing wide, just for the schedule to keep. I filed it under a tab I made that morning, Reunification Path. Tabs exist because accountability does. Later we drove the Shoreline Road, heater doing its plain work, wipers clean again. At a pullout, Goals rode a pocket of wind as if the bay owned a treadmill. Can we stop at the library? Elsie asked. She signed up for a counselor-led writing group and checked out a book of op-eds. She showed me the opening lines of an essay draft on unconditional warmth, the kind of argument a person makes when they're done arguing for their own place at the table. Think I should submit it, she said. Yes, I answered. Some words are doors you open for yourself. Supervised visits reserved Mondays in a neutral room with soft chairs and a clock that didn't scold. I didn't attend. The social worker did, and the room kept its record. When they returned, there were no theatrics to report, just puzzles solved and cocoa stirred and a promise to accept structure again next week. Forgiveness is a ledger you tally in practical increments, kept appointments, on-time arrivals, truths repeated until they stop sounding brave and start sounding ordinary. Neighbors kept their part of the weather. Anne dropped off a pie plate to retrieve, sticky note attached. Keep the light on. She didn't need to write it. The Porch knows. The HVAC storefront across town still wore its temporarily closed sign, letters sun-faded and edges curled. I told myself that consequence belongs to paper and prosecutors, not to me. Anger can be a tool. It should never be your only one. Evenings, the thermostat clicks and the fire settles. Elsie chooses electives without asking how they'll be received. She set 2 boundaries on her own. Phone off during meals, bed at a time that respects morning, and kept them. She jokes badly and on purpose. She asks if we can plant snap peas when the ground softens, and I Google frost dates like a man who just discovered seasons work for him too. Grandpa, she said one night, not looking up from her book, thanks for not making a big deal out of eating seconds. I answered the way houses answer, with a temperature that stays put. I keep a small list of things Martha used to say tucked in the binder pocket. I added one I only now understand. Heat is for sharing, not proving. We had all tried to prove something with heat once: competence, control, superiority. It turns out heat does not certify character. It reveals it. Truth before comfort isn't a slogan. It's how a thermostat learns its manners. The DA's office called to say the fraud review was ongoing. Kincaid texted a photo of a stamped motion queuing up the civil suit. Miss Delgado reminded me that goal lines move slowly in this system, but that slow isn't the same as stalled. I wrote those words on the whiteboard by the phone. They look good next to the grocery list.
On the last night of the month, the bay wind quieted and left the chimes alone. I did the circuit one more time. Elsie slept under a weight that used to be borrowed and now is owned. Candace's letter rested in its tab. The porch light switch waited under my thumb. The house made the sounds houses make when they've been told the rules and believe them. Radiator tick, duct hum, paper resting under a coffee mug ring where it doesn't matter. I stood on the threshold and thought about duty, how it is just love in work clothes. I stepped onto the porch and let the cold come honest. I turned the light on with no one in the yard to see it and every reason anyway. That light is not a warning and not a performance. It is an invitation and a vow. Inside, warmth went on doing what warmth is for. No permission slips, no bargains, no grades. The story we lived our way through had given us 3 lines worth keeping. Warmth is not a reward. Truth before comfort. Repair beats revenge. The rest is maintenance. Check the alarms, stack the wood, keep the ledger clean, show up on time. Dawn tested the edges of the sky and found them willing. I closed the door and felt wood meet, latched the way a sentence finds period. The house kept its promise, so we could keep ours.
In the end, what lasts isn't the noise of a single night, but the quiet systems that follow. A thermostat set with intention, a porch light that means what it says, a ledger of facts that outlives rumor. Justice at its best is not a shout. It's a series of measured clicks, orders entered, boundaries drawn, protections that hold when tempers don't. Warmth stops being a prize for good behavior and returns to its proper place as a duty. The door becomes wood again, not a verdict. And the work shifts from rescue to routine, checking alarms, keeping calendars, tending small repairs, practicing the plain courage of consistency. Paper can be a form of care when it shields the vulnerable. Truth is mercy when it arrives before comfort. Forgiveness is a road built in inches, not applause. In that steadiness, fear loosens its grip, rooms learn their quiet again, and mornings carry the kind of light that doesn't ask permission to enter. A house that keeps its promises doesn't make heroes, it makes room for safety, for agency, for the dignity of ordinary days. We are asked finally to choose maintenance over melodrama, to let warmth be unearned and unconditional, to believe that repair beats revenge because it lasts. Thank you for spending time with this story. If a line stayed with you, or if there's a promise you believe every home should keep, share it in the comments below. For more narratives that put truth before comfort and choose repair over spectacle, please follow and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps these lessons travel farther, and it tells the algorithm what the heart already knows. Some lights are meant to stay on.